When I finally opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed wasn't pain, it was rhythm. Air was moving in and out of me with a steady, mechanical patience, like my body had been handed over to someone else's schedule. I tried to swallow and couldn't. Something rigid sat in my throat, taped down, impossible to ignore, and panic flashed hot through my chest because I understood it before I understood anything else. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even clear my own throat. I was awake inside a body that didn't fully belong to me. A monitor kept time nearby, one clean beep after another, too calm for how terrified I felt. The ceiling above me was a flat hospital white, bright enough to make everything feel exposed. The sheets were pulled tight, crisp in that institutional way, and I could smell disinfectant and plastic and something faintly metallic, like the air itself had been scrubbed. I shifted my eyes toward the door and heard a voice through glass, muffled, but so familiar it almost cracked something open in me. My daughter. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pleading. She was answering questions, asking her own, repeating details back to a nurse like she'd done it before, like she understood the system, like she knew how to keep her voice steady when something inside her was probably breaking. And the nurse, whoever she was, spoke to my 16-year-old like she was the adult in the room. In that moment, lying there with a machine breathing for me, I realized the most terrifying part wasn't that I almost died. It was that my daughter sounded prepared. Just picture this for a second. You can hear your child handling your emergency with calm authority, and you can't lift your head, you can't reach out, and you can't say her name. What would that do to you? Before that day, my life looked functional from the outside. The kind of single mom strong, routine people compliment because it makes them feel hopeful. I was in my late 30s, working, paying bills, keeping the house from falling into chaos. I showed up. I handled things. I didn't fall apart in public. If there was a mess, I cleaned it. If there was a problem, I solved it. That became my identity, the woman who holds it together. But holding it together isn't the same thing as being okay. It's more like gripping a cracked mug so tight you convince yourself it isn't breaking. My daughter was 16 and quietly exceptional in a way that should have made me proud, and did, but also should have made me pause. She woke up on her own, got herself ready, remembered school deadlines without reminders. She knew where the important papers were. She knew how to talk to customer service like an adult. She knew what kind of day I'd had before I said a word, because she'd learned to read my footsteps, my silence, the way I closed the fridge. Sometimes she'd bring me coffee without being asked, set it down next to my laptop while I answered emails at the kitchen table. Sometimes she'd say, gently, that I hadn't eaten yet, like she was checking in on me the way I used to check in on her when she was little. And I told myself it was sweet. I told myself we were close. I told myself this is what happens when you raise a responsible kid. What I didn't admit, because admitting it would have required me to change, was how often I leaned on her like she was a roommate instead of my child. Not for chores, for emotional balance, for reassurance, for that steady presence that made my nervous system feel less alone. I'd come home exhausted and unload my day in careful pieces, and she'd listen with this calm, attentive face, the face of someone who learned early that other people's moods can become her job. I called it maturity. I called it teamwork. I even joked that she was my little life manager. Now, looking back, I can see the truth sitting in those jokes like a warning I ignored. I was letting her practice being the adult in our house, one small moment at a time, until it became her default role. Have you ever realized, too late, that the person you love has been adapting to your weakness in ways you never asked for, but also never stopped? It started the way so many real emergencies start, small, annoying, easy to dismiss. A scratchy throat, a low fever that came and went, that heavy, achy feeling like my bones were filled with wet sand. I told myself it was a flu, or whatever was going around, and I did what I always did. I negotiated with my body like it was an inconvenient employee. Not now. Not this week. Not when I have deadlines. Not when I'm the only adult in this house. I kept going to work. I kept driving. I kept standing in the kitchen at night pretending I had energy because I didn't want my daughter to worry. And the absurd part is that I believed I was protecting her by hiding it, when really I was just teaching her to watch me more closely. The cough showed up next, dry at first, then deeper, like it was coming from somewhere lower than it should. I'd feel it build in my chest while I was on a call or answering emails, and I'd mute myself and cough into my elbow, then unmute, and pretend nothing happened. My voice got rough. My head felt full, like pressure behind my eyes. Sometimes the room would tilt slightly when I stood up too fast, and I'd grab the counter and wait for it to pass like that was normal. At night, I'd wake up and realize I'd been breathing shallowly, like my body was trying to conserve effort. I'd sit up and take a deeper breath on purpose, just to prove I could. Then I'd lie back down and tell myself I was being dramatic. My daughter noticed anyway. She started hovering in subtle ways, the way she always did when she sensed me slipping. She'd ask if I wanted soup. She'd text me from her room to remind me to drink water, as if hydration was a task on a list we shared. She'd glance at me too long when I coughed, then look away like she didn't want to embarrass me by caring. And I let it happen. I even leaned into it without meaning to. When you're exhausted, being cared for feels like relief, even if it's coming from the wrong direction. There was a morning, 2 or 3 days in, when I stood in the shower and realized I was lightheaded just from washing my hair. I braced my hand against the tile and kept going, because stopping would have meant admitting something. My chest felt tight, not like sharp pain, more like the air had gotten heavier than usual. When I stepped out, my legs trembled with the kind of weakness that feels personal, like failure. I put on makeup anyway. I answered emails anyway. I drove anyway. And underneath all of it was this quiet, rising fear I refused to name, because naming it would have required me to ask for help. And I didn't like needing help. I didn't like the idea that my daughter might see me as breakable. Here's the question I wish I had asked myself sooner. Have you ever been so committed to being fine that you didn't notice you were slowly teaching the people around you to carry you? The day it happened wasn't dramatic at first. It was ordinary in the way danger likes to be ordinary, because ordinary keeps you relaxed. It was afternoon, and I was at home, telling myself I would rest as soon as I finished one more thing. One more email. One more form. One more small task that felt harmless by itself, like a single straw that couldn't possibly matter. My daughter was in her room doing homework, and I remember being weirdly comforted by the sound of her moving around. Paper shuffling, a drawer opening, the faint thud of her feet on the floor. Those small sounds made our house feel stable, like life was still following the usual script. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop open. My coffee had gone cold. My throat felt raw, and my chest had that tight, stubborn pressure again. I kept clearing my throat like I could clear the whole illness out with sheer annoyance. Then I stood up. That's it. That's the moment. I pushed my chair back and stood, and the world immediately narrowed like someone was closing curtains from the sides. It wasn't just dizziness. It was my vision tunneling, my hearing going strange and far away. The kitchen, my own kitchen, the place I knew better than any room in the world, suddenly felt unfamiliar, as if the angles were wrong. The counter seemed farther away than it should be. The air felt thick, like breathing through a heavy blanket. I reached for the edge of the table and missed it by an inch. That scared me more than anything, because missing your own table isn't a flu symptom. Missing your own table is your body telling you it's not coordinating anymore. I grabbed the counter the second time, fingers sliding on the smooth surface, and I tried to inhale deep. Tried, and the breath didn't come the way it was supposed to. It came in shallow, choppy pulls, and my chest tightened harder, not painful, but urgent, like a door that wouldn't open. My first instinct was denial. A ridiculous, stubborn thought. Sit down, drink water, and this will pass. Like I could bargain my way out of it. My second instinct was embarrassment. I was alone in my kitchen, and still, somehow, I felt embarrassed. That's how trained I was to be fine. I took a step toward the living room. Maybe because the couch felt like safety. Maybe because I thought if I could just lie down for a second I could reset myself. My legs didn't agree. They went soft, not fully giving out, but bending like they were made of rubber instead of muscle. The room tilted. A sharp, cold sweat broke across my back, and my hands started to shake. I tried to call my daughter's name, but it came out as a breathy sound that barely moved air. I tried again, louder, and it was still nothing. Just this weak, useless push of breath that didn't turn into a word. That was the instant fear stopped being abstract and became physical. Because fear is different when you can't communicate it. Fear is different when you realize you might not be able to summon help. I slammed my palm against the counter. Not hard, not dramatic, just enough to make noise, and I heard my daughter's door open down the hall. "Mom," she called. Her voice was sharp with attention. I tried to answer, But the cough hit instead, deep, ragged, and it stole what little air I had. I bent forward, both hands gripping the counter, shoulders rising, and I felt my vision flicker with little dark spots like burnt paper. My daughter appeared in the doorway, and the look on her face was the look I had been avoiding for days. Not teenage annoyance, not casual concern, but immediate assessment. Her eyes went straight to my posture, my skin, my breathing. She didn't ask if I was okay in that vague way people ask when they don't want the answer. She moved fast. She crossed the kitchen in a few steps and put a hand on my arm, steadying me like she'd done it before, like she'd been quietly preparing for this exact moment. I wanted to tell her it was nothing. I wanted to say, I just stood up too fast. I wanted to protect her from the fear rising in my own chest. But my body wasn't cooperating with my image anymore. My knees buckled, not fully collapsing, but enough that my weight shifted suddenly and my shoulder hit the cabinet with a dull thump. My daughter grabbed me with both hands, one at my elbow, one at my back, stronger than I expected, bracing my fall like she'd rehearsed it. "Sit," she said, and her voice wasn't pleading. It was instruction. I slid down, not gracefully, onto the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinet. The tile was cold through my clothes, and that coldness was the clearest sensation I had, like my body latched onto it because everything else was slipping. My daughter's face hovered close, her hair falling forward, her eyes too focused. "Breathe," she told me, like she was talking to someone having a panic attack, like she'd learned the tone somewhere. I tried. I really did. But every inhale felt shallow and incomplete, like I was only getting half of what I needed. She pulled her phone out so fast it was like the motion was already loaded in her muscles. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look to me for permission. She just dialed. And this is the detail that still makes my throat tighten when I remember it. She spoke to the dispatcher with calm clarity. She gave our address. She described my symptoms. She answered questions. She didn't cry while she did it. I could hear the steadiness in her voice, and, even through my own terror, something inside me broke quietly. Because my daughter sounded like the parent, and I sounded like the child, gasping on the floor. Just picture it for a second. Really picture it. Your kid kneeling beside you, one hand on your shoulder to keep you grounded, the other holding a phone, speaking like an adult while you can't even form a sentence. My vision narrowed again. The edges of the kitchen blurred. The ceiling light stretched into a strange, bright smear. Voices became distant, like the world was moving away from me. I felt my daughter's hand squeezing mine hard, like she was trying to anchor me in place. "Stay with me," she said, so quiet I almost missed it. And then everything thinned. The last thing I remember clearly is the cold tile under my legs and the sound of my daughter's breathing. Fast, controlled, trying not to turn into panic. After that, time stopped behaving like time. People talk about blacking out like it's a clean switch. On, off, nothing in between. For me, it wasn't nothing. It was fragments, drifting, like my mind was trying to keep working even after my body stopped cooperating. Sound was the first thing to break apart. I could still hear voices, but they didn't arrive in full sentences. They came as pieces, urgent syllables, someone saying my name, someone repeating numbers, the distant, sharp cadence of instructions. Then those pieces would stretch and blur, as if the words were being pulled underwater. I remember cold on my skin, gel, maybe, followed by the sting of something adhesive being pressed down. I remember the feeling of my arm being lifted and set back down, like I was a mannequin being positioned. I remember the air on my face changing, the pressure of something over my mouth, and then the strange sensation of breathing becoming a task I wasn't doing alone anymore. But the clearest images weren't medical. The clearest images were ordinary. My daughter at the kitchen counter earlier that week, making coffee in silence, the way she always did when she sensed I was running on fumes. Her hair pulled back, her shoulders slightly tense, her face calm in that practiced way that looks like maturity if you don't look too closely. I saw her sliding a mug toward me without asking, because she already knew I'd forget to take care of myself unless someone prompted me. I saw her standing in the hallway outside my bedroom at night, pausing like she was listening to my breathing, checking whether it sounded normal. I hadn't seen her do that in real life, not consciously, but in this strange inner space, it landed in me like truth. She had been monitoring me, not because she was nosy, because she felt responsible. And then, As if my mind couldn't stop tugging that thread, memories started lining up into a pattern I couldn't ignore. The way she'd remind me to eat. The way she'd ask if my bills were handled when she heard me sigh at the table. The way she'd soften her own emotions because she didn't want to add weight to mine. The way she'd become an expert at reading me, adjusting to me, managing the temperature of the room so I wouldn't break. I thought I'd been teaching her resilience. What I had actually been teaching her was that love means caretaking. That if you love someone, you skin them constantly. You anticipate their needs. You carry their moods. You become useful. You become steady. You don't ask for too much because the person you love is already tired. And the realization hit harder than any fear about my lungs or my heartbeat. I had been quietly stealing her childhood by turning her into my emotional support system. Not with cruelty, not with intention, with exhaustion, with pride, with that stubborn belief that I could do it all if I just pushed harder. Have you ever looked back on your own life and realized you weren't just surviving? You were training the people around you to adapt to your survival? Training them to fit around your stress like furniture pushed against a wall? In the middle of those thoughts, another kind of fear surfaced, the pure, animal fear of not coming back. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't mystical. It was practical. It was the sudden understanding that my daughter might be the one who gets the call. That she might be the one who has to sign something, answer something, sit in a waiting room with her backpack on her lap pretending she's fine while her entire world hangs in the air. And the worst part wasn't imagining her crying. The worst part was imagining her not crying. Imagining her being calm, polite, and competent because that's what she's learned to be when something is wrong. Imagining her swallowing her fear the way she's watched me swallow mine. Imagining her walking through a crisis like it's a checklist. I wanted to reach her in that space. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to hold her face that way anymore. I wanted to say, I'm sorry I made you the adult. I'm sorry I confused closeness with dependence. I'm sorry I let you become my backup plan. But you don't get to send messages from inside your own failing body. You just feel the weight of what you've done, and you realize how much of love is revealed only when it's almost gone. Just picture this, quietly, honestly. If you had to disappear for a week, for a month, forever, would the people you love finally get to rest? Or would they become even more responsible, even more careful, even more alone? Somewhere in the distance, I heard her voice again, steady, clear, too controlled, and it threaded through everything like a stitch holding me here. I clung to it not because it was comforting, but because it was real. It meant she was still there. It meant I still had a chance to return and make something right. And for the first time in years, my pride loosened its grip. In that inner darkness, I made a promise so plain it barely felt like language at all. If I wake up, I will stop asking my child to carry what only an adult should carry. Coming back wasn't cinematic. It wasn't a clean return with one deep breath and a meaningful glance. It was messy and frightening and slow, like surfacing through thick water. At first I didn't know where I was. I only knew sensation. My throat burned around the tube. My lips felt cracked. My tongue felt too big for my mouth, and every instinct I had screamed at me to cough, to swallow, to push the foreign thing out. My body tried to obey that instinct, and the result was immediate panic, because fighting the ventilator felt like fighting the only thing keeping me alive. My eyes opened and closed in short bursts. Light stabbed and then softened. Shapes came into focus and dissolved again. A nurse leaned over me, face half hidden by a mask, her eyes intent in that professional way that says she's monitoring you while also trying to calm you. I tried to speak. Nothing came. I tried to lift my head. It barely moved. I could hear the machine, the soft rush of air and the steady beeps, and those sounds felt like rules I had to follow. Inhale when it allowed. Exhale when it released. Don't fight. Don't panic. But you can't explain that logic to a terrified nervous system. All you can do is endure the feeling of being trapped inside your own body. Then I heard my name. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just said gently, like a question. And I knew that voice even before I could turn my eyes fully toward it. My daughter was outside the room. I couldn't see her at first, not clearly. Just the outline of her through glass and the movement of her hands as she spoke with someone at the desk. She had her hair pulled back, and she was standing with her shoulders squared, like she was trying to physically hold herself together. A nurse on the other side responded to her, and my daughter answered in that same calm, controlled tone I'd heard earlier. She asked about timing. She repeated information back. She thanked the nurse like she was trying to be easy, trying to be good, trying not to be a problem. And the moment that split me open wasn't the ventilator or the weakness. It was hearing my daughter say, very quietly, that she'd already handled it, already called, already contacted my job, already messaged my sister, already packed a bag, already told her school she'd be out, already found the insurance card, already made herself useful in a crisis like she'd been trained to do. Relief hit first, pure, grateful relief, because she was capable, because she wasn't frozen, because she was safe. And then guilt hit right behind it, heavy and sour, because she was capable in a way she shouldn't have needed to be. I tried to signal with my hand. My fingers moved like they belonged to someone older than me, someone exhausted. The nurse noticed and leaned closer. "You're okay," she said, slow and clear. "You're in the ICU. You were very sick. You're waking up now. Squeeze my hand if you understand." I squeezed. Tears filled my eyes again. Not graceful tears, just the body's release valve opening because it couldn't hold the pressure. The nurse watched my face and then glanced toward the door. "Your daughter is here," she said. "She's been here." Been here. The words landed with weight. Not visited. Not stopped by. Been here, like it was her post, her shift, her responsibility. Just picture that for a moment. Your 16-year-old sitting in a hospital waiting area for hours, doing homework between updates, answering calls, watching adults walk in and out of rooms, learning the language of illness because she has no choice. My chest tightened, and the monitor responded, beeping faster, as if it could measure regret. I wanted to tell the nurse to let her in. I wanted to see my daughter's face fully, close enough to prove to both of us that I was back. But the tube kept me silent, and the rules of the ICU kept us separated by glass. So I did the only thing I could do. I turned my head, slowly, carefully, until I could see her more clearly through the window. She was standing with her arms folded, listening to a nurse explain something, nodding in small, controlled motions. Her eyes were tired in a way that didn't belong on a 16-year-old. When she glanced toward me, her face didn't crumple. She didn't collapse into relief. She just held my gaze and nodded once, like she was telling me, "I'm here. I've got it. Don't worry." And that's when I understood the deepest damage I'd done. I had taught my daughter that she had to be the steady one, even when her mother was lying behind glass with a machine breathing for her. Have you ever seen someone you love act fine in a moment where they shouldn't have to be fine? What did it cost them to hold their face that way? Recovery didn't feel like a comeback story. It felt like learning how to be human again in slow, unglamorous steps. The first days after the ventilator were a blur of weakness, dry throat, and frustration that lived right under my skin. My body tired out from things that used to be automatic. Sitting up, standing, walking 3 steps to the bathroom with someone hovering nearby like I might tip over. Every time I tried to do too much, my lungs reminded me who was in charge. Not with drama, with limits. My daughter visited when she was allowed. The first time she came into the room, she smiled like she'd rehearsed it. She asked how I felt and tried to sound casual, but her eyes kept scanning the equipment, the monitors, the 4 lines, as if her brain couldn't stop tracking risk. She sat in the chair beside my bed and pulled out homework like she was proving she could keep life moving. And I watched her do it, and something in me finally refused to accept it as normal. I didn't have a big speech ready. I didn't have a perfect apology that would magically undo years of quiet parentification. I just had a new kind of honesty, the kind you get when you've been stripped down to the basics. So I started with something small and true. I told her, softly, that I had leaned on her too much, that I had let her become my steadiness, that I had treated her like a second adult in the house because it was easier than admitting I was overwhelmed. I didn't say trauma or boundaries like buzzwords. I just named the pattern in plain language, and I told her it wasn't her job anymore. She didn't cry. Not right away. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, and there was a flicker in her face, something like relief mixed with anger, like someone hearing permission to put a heavy bag down, but also realizing they never should have been carrying it. A day or two later, when I was strong enough to take a short walk down the hall, she asked me a question I still hear clearly. If I was going to be okay now. Not okay, like perfectly healthy. Okay, like stable. Okay, like present. Okay, like she could stop watching me so closely. Try to imagine what it feels like to hear your own child ask that. Not as a kid asking for comfort, but as someone checking whether the emergency phase is finally over. That question became my turning point more than any doctor's warning. When I got home, I didn't try to make up for lost time with grand gestures. I didn't promise to be a new person overnight. I did something harder and quieter. I changed the daily structure. I started handling the adult tasks again, even when it was inconvenient. I set alarms for my own meals instead of relying on her to remind me. I took over the school forms, the emails, the scheduling. I cooked simple dinners, not because I suddenly loved cooking, but because it sent a message: I'm back in my role. You can exhale. I also asked for help in a way I'd avoided for years. I talked to a counselor, not to chase a trendy label, but to learn how to stop turning stress into silence and silence into dependence. I learned to notice when I was about to unload my entire day onto my daughter's shoulders and instead pause, breathe, and choose another outlet. Sometimes that meant journaling. Sometimes it meant calling a friend. Sometimes it meant sitting with discomfort without turning my child into my comfort. And slowly, without any big announcement, my daughter started acting more like a teenager again. She spent more time in her room not because she was distant, but because she was allowed to be. She laughed louder. She got irritated about normal things. She stopped scanning my face every time she walked into the kitchen. One evening, weeks later, I saw her make herself a snack without looking over at me to check whether I needed something too. And I felt something unexpectedly sharp in my chest. Gratitude, yes, but also grief for how long it took me to earn that ordinary moment back. Have you ever realized that real love isn't proven by how much you can carry? It's proven by how willing you are to stop letting someone else carry you? I used to think the scariest part of getting sick would be the pain, or the hospital, or the idea of dying before I was ready. But that wasn't the hardest moment. The hardest moment was hearing my daughter's voice outside that ICU room, steady, polite, capable, and realizing I had quietly trained her to become that way for me. Not because she wanted to grow up faster, but because my strength left her no other option. I don't tell this story to scare you. I tell it because I didn't understand something important until my body forced me to stop. Love can get twisted, even in good homes, even with good intentions. If you're exhausted long enough, the people who love you will start adapting to your exhaustion. They'll become careful. They'll become useful. They'll become smaller in their own needs. So here's what I want you to do. Just gently, not dramatically. Think about the person who loves you the most. Think about what they do for you that they shouldn't have to do. Think about what you've normalized because it keeps you functioning. And then ask yourself a simple question. If you disappeared for a day, would they finally get to rest? Or would they become even more responsible? I'm still recovering in little ways. I still get tired. I still have days where I feel that old urge to push through and pretend I'm fine. But now I notice it, and I stop, because my daughter deserves a mother, not a project. If you still have the chance to say something kind, to take care of yourself before your body demands it, to let your child be a child, please don't leave it for later. Time feels endless right up until it doesn't.